Rachel Harris thought her life had finally found some stability. She and her husband Adam had worked hard to give their young son Peter a comfortable home. After years of financial struggles and navigating complicated family relationships, Rachel hoped the worst was behind them. She hadn't spoken to her father, Richard, in over a decade. The choice had been mutual. Rachel had never forgiven him for the way he treated her mother before she passed away, and Richard had made it clear he had no place for Rachel in his life after she defied his expectations and married Adam. As far as Rachel was concerned, her father's chapter in her life was closed. But one chilly October evening, that chapter burst wide open. Rachel had just returned home from work, exhausted but satisfied. The evening was supposed to be a quiet one, a simple dinner, perhaps a movie night with Adam and Peter. She was rummaging through the kitchen cabinets trying to find something to cook when her phone rang. Rachel glanced at the number. It was an unfamiliar one. Normally, she would ignore such calls, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello, is this Rachel Harris?" a voice asked formally. "Yes, this is she," Rachel replied, her curiosity piqued. "Mrs. Harris, my name is Philip Crawford. I am a lawyer representing your late father, Richard Harris. I'm afraid I have some important news for you regarding his estate." Rachel froze, her hand gripping the countertop. "My father, Richard, passed away?" The words felt strange on her lips, and she could hardly process them. Though they hadn't spoken in years, she had never imagined she would hear about his death from a stranger. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Philip said, with a slight pause. "If you could come to my office tomorrow, there are matters that need your attention regarding the inheritance he left behind." Rachel could barely say anything beyond agreeing to the meeting. She hung up, her thoughts a blur of shock and confusion. She had long imagined what she might feel when her estranged father died, but now that it was real, she felt numb. No tears, just an unsettling emptiness. Adam walked into the kitchen, seeing her pale face. "Rachel, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." She slowly shook her head. "My father, he's dead, and he left something for me." Adam moved closer, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. "I don't know what to say. I'm sorry, Rachel. I know things were complicated. But are you okay?" Rachel looked into his eyes, the warmth of his touch barely keeping her grounded. "I don't even know how to feel right now. I didn't expect this. I need to know what he left for me. Why now, after all these years?" The next morning, Rachel made her way to Philip Crawford's office with Adam by her side. The building was old, with creaky floors and high ceilings. Philip greeted them at the door and ushered them into his small office. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes, his expression full of sympathy as he gestured for them to sit. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Harris," he began, sitting across from them. "I'm sure this must be difficult. Your father, well, he was a complex man, but he made specific provisions in his will for you." Rachel took a deep breath, nodding for him to continue. "Your father's estate includes a property, the family house you grew up in, to be exact. He left it all to you." Rachel blinked, struggling to absorb the information. "The old house?" she repeated, her voice filled with disbelief. She hadn't set foot there since her mother's funeral, and the memories of that place were more painful than comforting. "Why would he leave me the house? We hadn't spoken in years. He didn't want me in his life." Philip hesitated, glancing down at the papers in front of him. He didn't leave any explanation in writing, but the fact remains that the house is now yours, and there are additional assets that come with it, accounts and investments. I would recommend visiting the property. There are some personal items your father specifically instructed should be given to you. He seemed adamant about that. Rachel exchanged a look with Adam, who gave her an encouraging nod. She turned back to Philip, her heart a strange mixture of emotions, resentment, confusion, and even curiosity. "Okay," she said. "We'll go to the house." The following weekend, Rachel and Adam decided to make the drive. Peter stayed with Adam's parents, who were more than happy to keep him occupied for the day. The road to the house was winding and familiar, triggering memories Rachel had long buried. As they approached, the sight of the house, tall, looming, with its paint faded and the garden overgrown, sent a shiver down her spine. It was as if time had stood still here. They stepped out of the car, and Rachel took a deep breath before leading Adam up the front steps. She inserted the key Philip had provided, and the door creaked open, revealing the dusty interior. The house smelled of old wood and stale air, and Rachel could almost hear echoes of her past, her mother's laughter, her father's stern voice. "This place is exactly how I remember it," she said quietly, her eyes scanning the dimly lit hallway. The furniture was still there, covered in white sheets, and family photos lined the walls, faded but intact. Rachel's gaze landed on one photo in particular, her mother, smiling warmly, holding Rachel as a child. She felt a pang of longing. "Where do you think these items are?" Adam asked, breaking the silence. "I'm not sure. Philip said they would be obvious." Rachel moved through the hallway, her footsteps echoing. She paused outside her father's study. The door was slightly ajar, and something drew her inside. The room was filled with old books, papers, and a large desk that seemed untouched. On the desk sat a small ornate box with her name on it. Rachel hesitated before opening it. Inside, she found letters, all addressed to her. She picked up the first one, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakably her father's, neat and precise. "Rachel," the letter began, "I know I failed you in many ways. I know I pushed you away when you needed me most. The truth is, I never knew how to handle my grief after your mother died. I blamed you for things that were never your fault, and I see that now. I hope, in some way, this house and these letters can make amends for the pain I caused you." Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes as she read. Adam moved closer, placing a comforting hand on her back. She reached for another letter, then another, each one filled with words of regret, attempts at explaining his actions, and expressions of love she had never heard from him in life. "I had no idea," Rachel whispered, her voice breaking. "He never said any of this to me, not once." Adam pulled her into a gentle embrace. Maybe this was his way of trying to make things right. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it sounds like he regretted it. Rachel nodded, wiping her tears. I think I needed to hear this. Even if it's too late, I needed to know he cared." They spent the rest of the afternoon going through the house, finding more small mementos her father had set aside, photos, her mother's jewelry, even a few of Rachel's childhood toys. It was as if Richard had been holding on to the best parts of their family, even as he pushed Rachel away. As they prepared to leave, Rachel stood in the living room, looking around one last time. The house no longer felt as haunted as it once had. Instead, it felt like a place where healing could begin, not just for her, but perhaps for the memory of her father, too. "What do you want to do with the house?" Adam asked as they walked back to the car. Rachel paused, considering. "I think I want to keep it, not to live in, but maybe to fix it up. It's part of my past, and maybe it's time I stop running from it." Adam smiled, squeezing her hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm here with you." As they drove away, Rachel looked back at the house, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the ending she had imagined for her relationship with her father, but perhaps it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could let go of the anger and embrace the complicated, messy love that had always been there, hidden beneath years of pain. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel found herself returning to the house more often. She began cleaning up the garden, clearing away the overgrowth that had consumed it. There was something cathartic about the physical labor, about restoring something that had been neglected for so long. She could feel her resentment slowly giving way to acceptance. One day, as she was trimming the hedges, she heard a voice call out from the street. "Excuse me, are you the new owner?" Rachel looked up to see an elderly woman standing by the gate, her eyes kind but curious. "Yes, I am. My father used to live here," Rachel replied, setting down her tools. The woman smiled. "I'm Margaret. I used to be friends with your mother years ago. I've lived down the street for as long as I can remember. When I saw someone working on the garden, I hoped it might be you." Rachel felt a warmth spread through her chest. "You knew my mother?" Margaret nodded, her eyes softening. "Oh yes, she was a wonderful woman. We used to have tea together on the weekends. She loved this garden. It's nice to see it coming back to life." Rachel invited Margaret inside and they spent hours talking. Margaret shared stories about her mother that Rachel had never heard. Stories of her kindness, her laughter, her dreams for the future. It was like discovering pieces of her mother she had never known, and Rachel felt a connection to her parents that she had thought was lost forever. In the following months, Rachel decided to restore the house, not just for herself, but for her mother's memory. She hired contractors to fix the roof, repaint the walls, and update the plumbing. Adam was supportive, helping her whenever he could, and even Peter got involved, planting flowers in the garden with his small hands. The transformation was slow, but with each improvement, the house began to feel less like a relic of a painful past and more like a tribute to the love that had once filled it. Rachel found herself smiling more often, the weight she had carried for so many years slowly lifting. One evening, as they sat on the newly restored porch, Adam turned to Rachel, his eyes filled with pride. "You've done an amazing job, Rachel. Your mom would be so proud of you." Rachel looked out at the garden, the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. I think my dad would be too," she said softly. It was the first time she had allowed herself to think of him that way, not just as the man who had hurt her, but as someone who had tried in his own flawed way to make amends. "I think you're right," Adam said, taking her hand. The house, once a symbol of all the hurt and anger Rachel had carried, was now a place of hope and renewal. It was still filled with memories, but they no longer haunted her. Instead, they reminded her of where she had come from and how far she had come. Rachel knew she couldn't change the past, but she could choose how to move forward. And as she sat there, surrounded by the love of her family, she felt ready to do just that, one day at a time.